I watched the drop darken my wine like a storm spreading across the bay. Tiny, almost beautiful if you didn't know what it meant. My son smiled at the glass as if he'd just solved money. I smiled back, raised it, and set it down in front of him instead. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. December 7th in Annapolis, the kind of cold that makes your breath look honest. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and lemon, Elaine's roast chicken recipe. The one I never get quite right, but I set the table anyway. And steady from 40 years as an electrician who learned to notice small, dangerous things. Tyler leaned into the counter like a salesman who already had the signature. He was flattering about the house. Open concept could really pop, Dad, and reaching for the wrong future. I'd stepped into the pantry for bread. When I came back, the Cabernet on the placemat showed a faint ripple hugging the rim, a glossy swirl that didn't belong. He hadn't heard me. His fingers hovered near the stem. His eyes slid away too quickly when he did look up. I lifted my glass, made a joke about overpouring, then set it down in front of him and traded it for his. He clinked his glass, took a generous swallow and laughed too loud. The way people do when they need the room to move with them. 10 minutes later, he was taking a call in the hall, eyelids soft around the edges. My neighbor, Ruth, had popped over with pecan pie. She's a retired nurse who can smell a sedative the way a fisherman smells rain. Her eyes met mine for a second. You saw it too. On the counter by the mail basket, a crumpled $2,800 credit card receipt for a gentleman's lounge, December 5th, and a realtor's card shoved halfway under a coupon for furnace filters. In Tyler's coat pocket on the peg, a white pharmacy bag printed with a Glen Burnie address, the kind of strip mall pharmacy that doesn't ask questions as long as the script is clean. We ate. The oven timer ticked cooling down seconds from somewhere near the stove, and the harbor wind needled the kitchen window. Tyler returned flush-cheeked, shaking off whatever fog he'd swallowed with a splash of water. Pitch mode. Dad, hear me out. Just a bridge round. 50 grand. 2-3 weeks tops. It's about streamlining assets, okay? Liquidity. He gestured not at his own life, but at mine, the solid oak table, the framed deed on the study wall, Elaine's recipe card, stained and perfect, tucked under a ceramic dish. I'll make you whole and then some, he said. Like he'd practiced it in a mirror. Streamlining assets, I said. Sounds like selling my life in pieces. Come on, he tried for charm. That boyish tilt to the head I used to cave for. We're family. Ruth refilled the water glasses, her hands precise. Lexi, glittering and restless, walked the rooms as if she were already pricing them out on her phone. It'll all be yours soon, she said with the kind of smile that forgets to include the eyes. He left early, claiming meetings. I stood at the sink and rinsed the wine glass he hadn't finished. Not hard enough to wash away the truth, just enough to keep the smear intact. The napkin he'd used to blot the rim, I folded it into a zip bag and dated it with a Sharpie. I recorded a voice memo on my phone. Time, smell, the ripple, the receipt, the pharmacy bag, like a man laying out tools before he opens the panel. The oven timer dinged once, a clean, bright sound. I looked at the house I built twice, once with wages, once with grief, and made myself a promise in the steam off the sink. Tomorrow I would confirm everything, in daylight, with witnesses on paper. The house was quiet except for the slow ticking of the kitchen timer, cooling on the counter, and the harbor wind fussing at the window. I stood there with the zip bag in my hand, the napkin folded like a small white flag that I refused to wave. My breath fogged the glass above the sink. I shut off the lights and stepped out to the back stoop, into air so cold it made my ribs feel honest. The Severn moves dark in December, a broad shoulder of water that's carried more secrets than any family. I sat on the top step, the paint flaking under my fingers, and rubbed the groove where my ring used to live. Elaine's been gone 5 years. There are still days I reach for a second coffee cup. Grief is a well-behaved guest until midnight, and then it goes rummaging through drawers you thought you locked. The thoughts came in staccato, the ripple on the wine, The slick tone Tyler uses when he's a step ahead of himself. The realtor's card under the furnace coupon. The Glen Burnie pharmacy bag peeking out of his coat like a child who wants to be found. I held the napkin up to the porch light, nothing to see and everything to know. Then the other voice. What if I am wrong? What if it was a stray drop or a $2 trick of the light, and I become the bitter old man who ruins Christmas because he can't forgive a son for being young and reckless? I gripped the rail until my fingers hurt. I could already hear the words people would choose for me instead of the ones I've earned. Controlling, paranoid, stingy, lonely. If you've ever been a father, you know the ache. I don't want to catch my son doing something terrible. I want to be wrong. I want the world to be easier than this. At dawn, I thought about calling him. You don't pour silence into a glass out of the blue, son. What were you doing? But confronting a liar who's not ready to tell the truth is like switching on a light in an empty room. You still trip over the chair. The cold finally pushed me inside. I put the napkin packet on the table and made coffee. A soft knock came at the side gate. Ruth, punctual as church bells, stood there with a thermos and 2 paper cups. She saw the zip bag on the table, the way a nurse takes in a patient before the chart. Before you talk, she said, write. We sat at the table where last night's armistice had failed. I slid a legal pad between us. We made columns. What I saw, the ripple, the way it spread, the angle of Tyler's hand. What I smelled, rosemary, lemon, and the faint medicinal sweetness you only notice once someone tells you to. What was on the counter? The $2,800 receipt, December 5th, 11:43 p.m., for a place I would never have stepped into, and a realtor's card with a cell number inked in a tidier hand than my son's. What I touched, the napkin, the glass stem, the pharmacy bag in the hall, I didn't open it, not yet. What time? Oven timer hit 0 at 5:52 p.m. I stepped to the pantry at 5:57 p.m. I returned to see the ripple at 5:58 p.m. Nitpick it, Ruth said. When lawyers talk, details matter. I replayed the voice memo I'd made the night before. My own voice sounded older than I feel. I added to it, reading the receipt amounts aloud, spelling the street name on the pharmacy bag, saying the date twice. Like I was wiring a panel and calling out the breaker numbers so an apprentice could follow me without getting shocked. Ruth nodded, satisfied. Chain of custody, she said almost to herself. No gaps, then the wave hit me. The one that steals your balance when you're standing in water up to your knees. I pressed both palms flat on the wood. What if I'm about to break my family with a story I can't prove? Ruth poured coffee, put the cup near my left hand, and placed 2 fingers on my right wrist like she was taking my pulse. Sedatives don't care about the calendar, Marty. Neither do gambling debts. And if I'm wrong, she said, we'll be grateful and embarrassed together. But if I'm right and we do nothing, you'll be grateful for nothing and embarrassed for the rest of your life. The word gambling scratched at a memory. Tyler's phone chirping all night when he crashed on my couch in October, little celebratory pings he called market alerts. Markets don't clap for you at 2 a.m. Slots do. I want to scream at him. I said, I want you to document, she said. Then scream into your lawyer's voicemail. So I did the next right thing, the tiny one that opens the door to the bigger one. I took the rinsed wine glass from the dish rack without touching the rim and slipped it into a clean 2-gallon zip bag. I labeled it in black Sharpie, glass, Deck 7, dinner, Martin Tyler. I wrote the time on the bag, 6:12 a.m. Deck 8. Ruth made a second label for the napkin, napkin, rim blot, Deck 7. She had a nurse's handwriting, confident, readable, the opposite of Lexi's looping performative script. We decided on a lab. Not the hospital, too many questions, too many acquaintances. A private outfit on Chinquapin Round Road that does household item analyses for landlords and cautious parents. They don't care about gossip. They care about trace substances. Before we left, I opened the fireproof box in the hall closet. I laid the glass bag and napkin on top of a stack of documents that make up my life in numbers, the deed copy to the house on Sherwood Road, my pension statements with $412,000 worth of quiet safety, A folder with the appraisal from 2 years ago. Equity at 690 lines and 142 for a house I've earned twice. I added last night's voice memo transcription to that pile, dated and signed. Then I shut the box, turned the key, and slipped the key into my front pocket. I wrote down in my ledger 7:05 a.m., evidence secured. On the way out the door, I reached for the garage keypad and changed the code from the year Elaine and I were married to a number only I would remember, the amperage rating of the first service panel I ever installed without supervision. I wrote that down too. Tiny changes are the first lock you turn when the big locks still feel too final. At 8:10 a.m., we pulled into the lab's small parking lot. They buzzed us in. A technician with a calm face and latex gloves took the glass and the napkin. Ruth signed as witness on the intake form without being asked. She knows how to make the right things official. 2 to 3 days for a written result, the tech said. We'll call if we see anything obvious sooner. Outside, the cold had sharpened. My hands didn't shake. The earth tilts back toward light this time of year, whether you deserve it or not. On the ride home, I dialed Carl Berman, my attorney, from the car's hands-free. He answered on the second ring, the way men do who hated bullies in grade school and made a living out of it. Martin, he said, and I told him the story without bravado and without apology. What I saw, what I bagged, what we'd just done. He listened, and when I was done, he didn't waste my time. Good, he said. Now we do 3 things. 1, we build a paper trail. Everything dated, witnessed, copied. 2, we confirm with a lab, and anyone who can say what was in that glass. 3, you don't touch money, titles, or locks without telling me first. If he's trying the house, I'll ice the bank before lunch the day we need to. I felt something unclench behind my ribs. And Tyler? I asked. Don't play sheriff, he said. Play bookkeeper. Sheriff comes later, if at all. I hung up as we turned onto Sherwood. The house looked the same, December light on red brick, a dusting of frost on the porch rail. But I was different. Not angrier, just awake. I wrote 1 more line in the ledger, 9:02 a.m., called Carl. Next steps, test residue, document everything, no money moves without counsel. Then I sat at the table with the empty place where my ring used to be and my neighbor's steady hand nearby, and I let the exhaustion pass through me like a weather front. The plan wasn't brave yet. It was just careful, which is how brave starts Monday, December 8th. The morning came thin and pale over the harbor, like light filtered through old glass. I poured my first coffee and opened the notebook I kept in the drawer beside the stove, the one where I log every expense and repair. I wrote at the top of the page, Investigation, Day 1. Beneath it, I listed 3 tasks: lab follow-up, attorney appointment confirmation, independent verification, financial and behavioral. If you want to catch the truth, you can't run at it. You set traps of patience and paper. Ruth arrived right at 8 carrying a folder. Inside were copies of the lab intake form, the technician's signature, and her witness line. Chain of custody complete, she said. Now you wait. But waiting is hard when your son may have tried to drug you. So I filled the space with order. I went to the garage, changed the code on the keypad again, wrote it down and stored it in the fireproof box. I replaced the front door deadbolt with a new Schlag model and wrote Deck 8, Rekey pending Friday in my ledger. Then I checked the mail. There it was, an envelope from Harbor Federal. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was another holiday flyer, but the first line froze me. We noticed your recent inquiry regarding a home equity line of credit. I read it twice. Then again, I hadn't made any inquiry. The letter was dated December 6th, 1 day before that dinner. My name, my address, but not my doing. I laid the paper flat on the table, smoothed it with my hand, and took a photo on my phone. Then I slipped the original into a manila folder marked Financial Irregularities, December. I placed it on top of my will, right beside the deed. The house had been my retirement plan, my anchor in Elaine's absence. And now someone, my son, had tested the ropes. I called Carl's office. His assistant, Connie, answered. He's expecting you Thursday at 10, she said. Bring copies of everything. Originals stay home. By 10:30, I'd moved on to the next name in my notes, Janelle Pierce, a private investigator that Carl trusted for clean work. When she picked up, her voice was clipped and professional, like someone who'd long since learned to separate lies from evidence. I explained briefly, gave the date on the lounge receipt, the pharmacy bag location, and that Uber timestamp I'd seen flash on Tyler's phone at dinner. 3:12 p.m. December 7th. No hacking, no trespassing, I said. All I need is what's legal and public. That's the only kind I do, she replied. Give me 72 hours. I'll start with spending patterns, photos, and open source data. If he's been sloppy, I'll find the breadcrumbs. I hung up and felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind you get when you finally move from panic to planning. At 2:40 p.m., I noted in my ledger, garage keypad code changed. Tyler unaware. Then I underlined it twice. The kind of detail that sounds obsessive until it saves your life. Evening came early. A grey, heavy light over Annapolis that makes everything look older. Ruth came over with soup and 2 slices of cornbread. She saw the open envelope on the table and read it silently. Her jaw clenched. That's not identity theft, she said. That's entitlement. We ate in quiet. The harbor wind hummed like an uninvited guest. After she left, I sat by the window and stared out toward the street lamp, reflecting on the ice in the gutter. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Tyler. Hey, old man, funny thing about liquidity events. Got to be agile these days. The smiley face hit harder than the words. That was how he always disguised guilt. With swagger. Then Lexi posted something on social media that made my stomach turn. A picture of a waterfront kitchen, glossy white counters, captioned, manifesting the next chapter. Their manifestation was my home. I printed that post. Slid it behind the harbor federal letter and closed the folder. My hand didn't shake. I wrote my 2 rules for the coming week on the inside cover. Keep things boring and provable. Don't warn a thief you're counting the silver. At 11:05 p.m., I turned off every light except the porch one. I stood by the window and whispered to the cold air, let's see what he does next. Tomorrow would bring the lab report, and with it the choice between mercy and war. Tuesday, December 9th. The morning came clear and brittle, sunlight glinting off the bay like shards of glass. I was halfway through my coffee when the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won and I pressed play. This is Janine from Chesapeake Forensics Lab, the voice said. We've got a preliminary report. You might want to call us back. My stomach tightened. I called immediately. Mr. Hale, she said when she answered, your wine sample tested positive for trace amounts of zolpidem. That's a sedative, commonly used in prescription sleep aids. We'll email a written report by evening and send a physical copy by courier tomorrow. Zolpidem. I knew the name. Elaine had taken it years ago for her insomnia. A pill and a glass of wine could drop a grown man faster than a blackout. Was it a lot? I asked. No, she said, but enough to impair judgment. Definitely not something you'd expect to find in wine unless it was added. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there staring at the table. The same table where my son had smiled across from me like he'd just given me a toast. I didn't shake. I didn't rage. I wrote positive for zolpidem in my notebook, circled it twice, and underlined the date. At 4 that afternoon, I met Janelle Pierce at a cafe near Main Street. She was the kind of woman who carried herself like she'd been underestimated once too often. Black coat, hair tied tight, everything about her efficient. She slid a folder across the table. Everything I found is public record or third-party observation. Nothing illegal, all admissible. Inside were photos. Tyler walking into a strip mall pharmacy on December 7th. Time stamped at 3:18 p.m. Another photo of him leaving with a small white bag. A copy of his Uber trip log showing pickup near his apartment at 2:55 p.m. Drop off at Glen Burnie Plaza at 3:12 p.m. Exactly the time I'd glimpsed on his phone. And then, the kicker, screenshots from a public Venmo feed. On December 5th, the night of the $2,800 club charge, he'd sent a payment to someone named Lex L. with the caption, "Victory drinks." I flipped to the last page, an image grabbed from a mutual friend's Instagram story. Tyler at a bar, phone screen visible, text half caught in the photo, Dad's comp value. He'd been estimating the worth of my house. I looked up. You said this was all legal to collect? Absolutely. And if you need it notarized or time-stamped, I can do that tomorrow. I nodded. Do it. She packed her bag. You planning to confront him? Not yet, I said. I'm planning to build a wall of proof so high he can't climb it. That night, I sat at my desk and drafted something I should have written years ago, a letter of intent to amend my will. I changed the executorship to Carl, my attorney, and began creating what he'd once called a spend-thrift trust, a structure that releases funds only under strict conditions. No lump sums, no shortcuts. I dated it and took it to my bank the next morning for notarization. The notary looked at me funny when I said I wanted 2 copies, one sealed, one for my safe, but she didn't ask questions. By Wednesday, the trap was tightening. I hired a locksmith to rekey the entire house that coming Friday. I texted Ruth to witness it so every change would have a record. Then I went online and ordered a $39 voice recorder, tiny, motion-activated, and fully legal in Maryland as long as I'm part of the conversation. I hid it behind the china cabinet in the dining room, a small insurance policy for the next family talk. That evening, the email from the lab arrived. I printed the report, sealed it in a clear folder, and filed it in my fireproof box. Evidence item number 3. The physical copy would come tomorrow, but the digital one already had my son's name written A. I didn't know if I'd ever forgive him, but I knew this. I wasn't going to lose the home Elaine and I built, not to a stranger, and certainly not to my own blood. Tomorrow, I'd meet the bank, and if Tyler had already tried to use my name to open a loan, I'd make sure the doors to my money slammed shut for good. The next phase wouldn't be emotional. It would be surgical. Wednesday, December 10th. I woke before sunrise, the cold light just beginning to pry open the harbor. My coffee went untouched as I rehearsed what I'd say to the bank manager. I wasn't walking in as some confused retiree. I was walking in as a man who built his life with his own hands, wire by wire, and wasn't about to have it quietly stripped from him by his own son. At 9 sharp, I stepped into Harbor Federal. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and money. A Christmas tree blinked by the window, red lights, hollow warmth. The branch manager, a neat man named Edwin Shaw, led me into his glass-walled office. I believe there's been an attempt to open a home equity line under my name, I said. I'd like to verify it, he blinked. That's serious, Mr. Hale. Let me pull up your account. His keyboard clacked for a long 30 seconds before he frowned. Yes, there was an online inquiry submitted 2 days ago. Device ID doesn't match your usual logins, and the IP address traces to a commercial server in Baltimore. Can you tell me if it was approved? Not yet. It was flagged by our fraud team for manual review. You're lucky they noticed. We can freeze all new applications tied to your SSN right now. Do it, I said. He printed a form, and we filled it out line by line. When he asked for a verbal passphrase, I smiled faintly and said, "Blue crabbing." He chuckled, unaware it was the phrase my father used when he taught me how to bait a line in the 7. Steady, patient, no sudden moves. Edwin stamped and signed the form. You're protected now. Any further attempt will trigger an alert directly to our fraud unit. By 10:30, I was in Carl's office watching him read the papers like a judge preparing a verdict. When he looked up, his eyes were sharp. He's not just gambling, he said. He's desperate. We'll need a sworn affidavit stating what you found, bank letter, lab result, and your own statement of suspicion. I'll notarize it myself. We spent 2 hours compiling everything, the Zolpidem report, the HELOC letter, the photo evidence from Janelle. Carl signed the affidavit, stamped it, and slid a copy into a red folder. This goes nowhere until we're ready, he said. But if he makes another move, I can walk this straight into the state's attorney's office and the bank's legal department. You're covered. When I left, the sky had that color between rain and steel. My reflection in the car window looked older, yes, but also steadier. Friday, December 12th, the locksmith came at noon. Ruth stood by with her clipboard, signing off as witness for every new key installed. We sealed the old keys in an envelope labeled Pre-Deck 12 Locks, Invalid. I wrote the date across the flap, added it to my evidence box, and locked the closet. That afternoon, while the smell of brass and new metal still lingered in the air, Tyler showed up. No text. No warning, just 3 knocks, too loud, too confident. When I opened the door, he grinned like nothing had ever happened. "Hey, Dad, thought I'd surprise you." "You always do," I said. He stepped in, scanning the room. "Smells different in here. New locks?" "Something like that," he laughed, a short bark that didn't reach his eyes. "Lexi and I have been talking about this new venture. Bridge financing, short-term capital play. I think you'd love it. Low risk, high liquidity. We just need a bit of seed money to cover overhead before the next round." "How much?" I asked. 50, maybe 60,000. "Just to move things." "And when would you return it?" He shrugged. 2-3 months. You know me, I always land on my feet. That was when I saw Lexi lingering by the coat rack, pretending to adjust her scarf. And there it was again, a blue crab keychain dangling from her purse. "My spare, where'd you get that?" I asked. She froze. "Oh, found it outside last week, thought it looked cute." Ruth, who had come by to drop off cookies, stepped from the kitchen and crossed her arms. "Funny thing to find," she said. I took the keychain gently from Lexi's hand and slid it into a plastic sleeve. "Keys are tricky," I said. "They only belong to the person who earned them." I wrote the date, Deck 12, on the sleeve with my pen. Tyler's face changed. Not anger, just calculation, like he was deciding whether to double down or fold. "Careful, Dad," he said finally, voice low. "You'll make me feel unwelcome," I smiled. "Then maybe it's time you stopped visiting uninvited." He turned, jaw tight, and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the dishes. From the porch, my hidden recorder clicked to life. I heard his voice, muffled but distinct. "He'll cave." "He always does, not this time." That evening I played the recording back to Ruth. She shook her head, her silver hair catching the lamplight. "He's testing the fence," she said. "Now you know where to reinforce it." I poured us each a small glass of cider. "Christmas Eve," I said. "Let's give him one more chance to show his hand." Ruth smiled, slow and knowing. "And then?" "Then," I said, "we'll stop pretending this is family business. It'll be public." I wrote one last note in my ledger. Deck 12, locks changed. "Spare key confiscated." Subject defensive. Next step, controlled confrontation on Christmas Eve. Outside, the harbor wind howled across the bay like it had something to say. I was ready to listen. Christmas Eve, December 24th. Annapolis dressed itself in holiday disguise, wreaths on every door, harbor lights twinkling like false promises. Inside my house, the air smelled of nutmeg, cinnamon, and something I hadn't felt in years, control. I'd invited a handful of neighbors for cider and pie. Ruth was in charge of the oven, and I'd made sure the recorder on the shelf behind the china cabinet had fresh batteries. If Tyler showed his hand tonight, the walls would remember. At 6:30, the knock came, brisk, rehearsed. Tyler in a crisp jacket, Lexi glittering like she'd come straight from a catalogue. "Merry Christmas, Dad," he said, voice all cheer. He carried a bottle of wine with a ribbon around its neck. I smiled, took it, and set it unopened on the counter. "We're keeping it dry tonight," I said. "Apple cider only?" Lexi laughed too loud. "How wholesome." Ruth poured the cider and made small talk while I watched Tyler's phone light up with notification after notification. The familiar casino-style chime. He silenced it quickly, but I caught the icon, Lucky Strike app. We ate ham, exchanged polite nothings. Then he followed me into the study, closing the door halfway behind him. "Listen, Dad," he said, lowering his voice. "I know things have been tense, but I've got a plan that'll fix everything. I just need you to trust me with the equity line." "I'll manage it." "You won't have to lift a finger." I leaned against the desk. "Funny thing," I said. "My credit union froze new applications after they noticed a fraudulent inquiry last week. Any idea who might have tried?" His eyelids fluttered. "Identity theft is crazy these days. Yeah, I said, it sure is. The kitchen timer dinged. Ruth's signal. I handed Tyler a sealed envelope. Christmas gift, I said. He grinned. You didn't have to. He tore it open and froze. Inside was a photocopy of my unsigned spendthrift trust draft. What is this? He demanded. Protection, I said. From bad investments, including my own flesh and blood. You can't control everything. You're choking my growth. Ruth appeared in the doorway with a plate of cookies, having heard the last word. Some things need to be choked, she said calmly, before they burn down the house. Tyler flushed scarlet. You're manipulating him, he snapped at her. She's reminding me what survival looks like, I said. He stormed out of the study, calling for Lexi. She followed, grabbing her purse. I watched the blue crab keychain glint under the light, the same one I'd sealed in evidence last week. She must have bought another. People repeat themselves when they think they're clever. At the door, he turned. You're going to regret this. I already have, I said. They left in a gust of perfume and cold air. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Ruth sat down across from me at the dining table. That was your test, she said. I nodded. And he failed. We went through the evening's recording together, listening to the edge in his voice, the word equity, the tone of practiced persuasion. I filed it to my digital folder marked Evidence Deck 24. At midnight, I stood by the window, watching lights shimmer across the frozen bay. My phone buzzed, a text from Tyler. Let's reset on New Year's. Big family dinner. Start fresh. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed back, January 6. Bring anyone you trust. I added a few neighbors to my own invite list the next morning, plus Carl. Drop by after dessert for a toast, I wrote in the message. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, his version of a battle cry. The twist wasn't the paperwork. It was the witnesses. I'd already prepared the physical evidence, the sealed glass, the napkin, the lab report, the HELOC letter, the spare key envelope, ready to display like museum exhibits. The next time Tyler raised a glass in my house, he'd be drinking to the truth. I checked the recorder one last time before bed. Every click, every sigh captured. The house itself was on my side now. Outside, the harbor lights winked like co-conspirators. January 2nd, the kind of winter evening when the harbor looks like it's holding its breath. I'd spent the morning polishing the dining table Elaine picked out 30 years ago, the one Tyler once used as a fort when he was 6. That table had seen family, laughter, and loss. Tonight it would see the truth. By 5:30, the roast was in the oven. Ruth had set the table, each fork lined like soldiers. My neighbors, George and Denise, brought bread and polite curiosity. They didn't know what was coming, but they trusted me enough to show up when I said, "Come hungry and keep your eyes open." The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. Tyler strolled in like a man arriving at his own victory party. Lexi followed, her phone already out. "This looks amazing, Marty," she said, scanning the room for her angles. Tyler dropped his coat on the back of a chair without asking. "Big night, huh, Dad?" "Fresh start." "Fresh," I said. That's one word for it. We sat. The candles flickered against the window. Tyler carved himself the largest slice of roast and started telling a story about market opportunities before anyone asked. Lexi filmed the plate like it was part of her highlight reel. The room hummed with small talk and suspicion. When dessert came, I stood. The fork in my hand caught the light like a cue from somewhere divine. I tapped my glass once. "Before we continue," I said, smiling, "please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from." The neighbors laughed, thinking I was joking. Ruth just smiled knowingly. "Now," I continued, "I've got a New Year's story to share." I reached behind the sideboard and placed a sealed zip bag on the table. Inside, the wine glass from December 7th gleamed faintly under the light. Next to it, I set a second bag, the folded napkin, with that faint maroon blot on the corner. Tyler froze mid-bite. "What's this?" "Artifacts," I said. "From the night you had dinner here last month," he laughed. "Dad, come on, what's this about?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a C folder. Susan laid it open, the seed lab report, with Chesapeake Forensics letterhead, embossed seal at the bottom. This report confirms that the residue on that glass tested positive for zolpidem, chatusacin, a sedative. Same one your mother used to take back in the day. Enough to drop someone's blood pressure through the floor. Lexi's phone tilted downward. Her smile vanished. I don't know what you're talking about, Tyler said. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious, I said. Serious enough to have Ruth witness the chain of custody. She drove me to the lab. And serious enough to file copies of everything with my attorney. Ruth nodded once, calm as a metronome. Chain's intact, she said. I unfolded another page. The HELOC inquiry letter suckered from Harbor Federal. Someone tried to open a home equity line of credit in my name 2 days before that dinner. Used an IP address from Baltimore. I'm retired, Tyler. I haven't set foot in Baltimore since your mother's funeral. The neighbors exchanged glances. Lexi's face drained of color. Dad, Tyler said, his voice cracking just a little. You're confused. Maybe someone what? I cut in. Walked into a strip mall pharmacy in Glen Burnie at 3:12 p.m. the same day you came for dinner? Maybe someone else has your Uber receipts and your face on camera? His mouth opened, then closed. I wasn't angry. Just tired. You didn't just try to take my money, son. You tried to take the years that bought it. The clock on the mantel ticked. In that silence, the room itself felt like a courtroom. Lexi stood abruptly. We don't have to listen to this. Actually, a voice said from the hallway, you do. Carling stepped into the doorway, his grey suit sharp against the golden light. He carried a slim leather briefcase. Good evening, he said smoothly. I'm Carl Berman, Mr. Hale's attorney. I'm here for the toast, Tyler blinked. You set me up. I shook my head. No, you set yourself up. I just wrote it down. Carl placed a folder on the table and opened it. For everyone's clarity, he said, the amended will and the Spendthrift Trust G are now active as of this afternoon. That means all of Mr. Hale's assets, home, pension, investments, are secured under trustee supervision. No one, including family, can access them without meeting specific conditions. And any further attempt to open financial products in his name will automatically trigger law enforcement notification. Lexi gasped softly. Tyler's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. You can't do this, he said, his voice small now. Carl adjusted his glasses. Actually, he can. And he did. The clock struck 6:30. Somewhere down the street, someone's fireworks went off early. Tyler slammed his hand on the table, making the glass rattle. You planned this whole damn circus to humiliate me. No, I said quietly. To protect myself, and to remind you what honesty costs. For a long moment, he stared at me, not as a father, not as a victim, but as a man who had stopped playing the fool. His eyes flickered, softening for just a second, and in that breath I saw the boy who used to help me wire outlets in the garage. Then it was gone. He stood, grabbed his coat, and looked at me like I was a stranger. You'll regret this, he said. I already did, I answered. He left, Lexi following behind him without a word. The door closed with a soft finality that felt like the end of a sermon. I turned to my guests. George cleared his throat, awkward but respectful. Ruth touched my shoulder. Carl raised his glass of cider. To earned peace, he said. I nodded, lifting mine. And to boundaries that hold. We drank. Later, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the table. The sealed glass and the napkin were still there, mute witnesses to a betrayal too personal for police and too intimate for strangers. I took one long breath, packed them back into their folders, and placed them in the safe. Outside, the harbor wind howled, sweeping away the last of the holiday lights. Inside, for the first time in years, I felt safe. The morning after the dinner felt like waking up in a different house. The walls were the same, the furniture unmoved, but something invisible had shifted, as if the air itself was lighter without deceit pressing against it. January 3rd, 8:04 a.m. My phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. Dad, I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I was stressed. You misunderstood everything. Let's talk. It was the kind of apology that doesn't heal, a paper bandage over a knife wound. I took a screenshot and saved it under my evidence post-reveal folder. Carl had taught me that every story needed timestamps when money was involved. 2 days passed before I heard from him again. No calls, no knocks, just silence. Then on January 5th, Janelle emailed me her final report. I printed it out, page after page, each one heavy with what I already knew in my bones. She'd confirmed everything. The strip mall pharmacy purchase matched a prescription filled under a woman's name connected to Tyler's friend. But the pickup signature was his. The Uber logs aligned perfectly with the time he'd left his apartment before our dinner, and there were public records of cash advances and gambling app deposits that painted the rest of the picture. Desperation. Masked by charm, I forwarded the entire file to Carl with a single line. For your records, and for the next step, if necessary. That evening, Carl called me back. His tone was measured but firm. Martin, I'm forwarding the packet to the bank's fraud department and the assistant state's attorney. Given the evidence, this qualifies under the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult statute. You're not vulnerable, but the intent fits. It'll at least create a record, I exhaled slowly. Do we press charges? Not yet, he said. Let's see if the warning alone teaches him what consequences feel like. That word, consequences, echoed in my head like a bell long after I hung up. On January 7th, Ruth came over with her laptop. We played the audio recording from the porch one more time. The faint wind, Tyler's voice muttering, "He'll cave." She paused the playback halfway and looked at me. "He's not sorry, Marty. He's regrouping." "I know," I said quietly. "That's why we're documenting, not forgiving." We transcribed every word, dated it, signed our initials at the bottom, and added it to the folder labeled Porch Evidence. Deck 12. I wrote one more entry in my ledger. Jan 7. Audio confirmed. Behavioral pattern consistent. Maintain all freezes. The next morning he showed up. It was just afternoon, sunlight pouring through the blinds like thin gold bars. The knock was gentle this time, not the arrogant percussion from weeks ago. I opened the door halfway. Tyler stood there holding a bouquet of supermarket lilies, a sheepish smile on his face. "Hey, Dad, I wanted to say sorry in person," he began. "Things got crazy with Lexi. She's gone now. I'm trying to fix my life. Just need a little help with rent, maybe 10 grand to get back on my feet." I leaned against the doorframe. "You know," I said, "for years I thought love meant always opening the door. But love isn't charity, son. It's a boundary." His face twitched, the old charm slipping for a moment. "I'm not trying to scam you, Dad. Just temporary." "I believe you," I said, "because now it's impossible for you to do it again." I handed him an envelope. He tore it open and froze. Inside was a single-page notice I'd typed myself, signed by Carl. Effective immediately, all requests for assistance or financial access must be made in writing to the trustee. No entry to property without invitation. Keys nullified. Will amended. Spendthrift trust active. He stared at the paper. "What's this supposed to mean?" "It means," I said softly, "you didn't lose me. You gave me away." He blinked, uncertain whether to shout or beg. "You're ruining everything." "No, Tyler," I said. "I'm saving what's left." I closed the door gently, not slammed, not angry, just final. The chain clicked into place, like punctuation on the last line of a sentence that had taken decades to write. Inside, the house hummed with quiet. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, and sat by the window overlooking the harbor. The tide was low, the kind that leaves the rocks bare and ugly but honest. I'd built this home with 2 hands and a steady heart. Now I was guarding it with the same. The legal case was simmering. Carl would keep the files warm. The moral one was over. I picked up my notebook and wrote the final line for that day. Boundaries are love. Lawyers are locks. And peace is the sound of a door that doesn't open. By late January, the house had settled into a calm I hadn't known in years. The phone barely rang. The nights were quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the gulls screaming over the harbor. I had no idea peace could sound like that. A silence earned, not inherited. It started with a call from Harbor Federal. "Mr. Hale, the officer said. "We just wanted to thank you for catching that fraudulent inquiry last month. We flagged the name associated with your address and closed out the case internally. No further attempts have been made." I could hear the faint rustle of papers as she spoke, the sound of bureaucracy folding neatly around justice. "We'll also send a formal letter confirming the fraud alert," she added. "It's rare someone spots this so early." "Not rare," I said. "Just personal." A week later, Carl called. "The assistant state's attorney filed a cautionary memo," he said. "They're not pressing charges, not yet. But there's now an official record under Tyler's name. If he ever tries this again, even in another county, the system will know." "Paper remembers," I murmured. "Exactly," Carl replied. "And your spendthrift trust is finalized. It's airtight." The trust was simple. Tyler wouldn't touch a penny unless he completed 2 years of verified financial counseling and stayed debt-free for 12 consecutive months. After that, he could receive a small stipend, enough to live, not enough to spiral. If he failed, the assets would flow into the Elaine Hale Apprenticeship Fund, a scholarship for trade school students. I'd already arranged the automatic transfer. That night I went down to the harbor with Ruth. We walked in silence, hands in our coat pockets, watching the lights skip over the water. She said, "You did the hardest thing a parent can do. You chose the truth over the child." "I didn't want to punish him," I said. "I just wanted to stop the bleeding." "Justice isn't punishment," she said. "It's a boundary that doesn't move." I nodded, feeling the weight of that line settle into me. The next morning, I printed the trust summary and enclosed it in a plain brown envelope. Inside, I tucked a handwritten note. "Tyler, you're not cut off, you're cut loose. Get clean. Get steady. When you're ready to build something that lasts, the door to honesty will still open." Dada included a small list of counselors who specialized in gambling recovery, with phone numbers circled. Then I mailed it. No return address. For a week I heard nothing. Then one morning a message came, not from him, but from an automated notification: "Document delivered. Signature received." That was enough. I turned off the phone, made tea, and opened my ledger one last time under the old heading Incident, December 7th, Resolution. Under it I wrote, Jan 22, Trust executed. Attorney confirmation received. Jan 24, Scholarship account funded. Jan 25, Notification delivered to Tyler. No response. Silence. Closure. Then I added one more line. Justice achieved without bitterness. That night, I watched the reflection of the harbor lights ripple across the water. The same bay that had witnessed the worst of my doubts now carried something calmer. Every document, every receipt, every line in the ledger had built a kind of fortress, not to trap anyone, but to keep decency inside. I thought of Elaine, of her laugh echoing in the hallway, of the quiet pride she would have felt knowing that even after betrayal, I didn't throw away the principle she'd taught me. Kindness isn't weakness, but it needs a lock on the door. I smiled at that. Justice, I realized, wasn't a courtroom or a verdict. It was balance. A man standing steady after the storm, not asking for applause, just breathing clean air. The next day, I called Ruth. "He hasn't answered," I said. "Good," she replied. Sometimes silence is the only honest reply. I looked out the window, the harbor stretching wide and patient, and whispered, "Then I'll take the truth in quiet form." February rolled in with flurries that dusted the rooftops and left the harbor looking like a watercolor, grey, soft, and endless. I used to dread winters after Elaine died, the cold echo of her absence in every corner of the house. But that year the quiet felt earned. The fear was gone. The locks were new. The ghosts had names. I built myself a small routine, the kind only older men understand. Slow, deliberate, anchored in purpose. Every Monday, I'd visit the trade school downtown, where I'd once taught part-time wiring safety courses. I signed up as a volunteer again. Twice a week, I'd stand in front of a room full of apprentices, kids barely older than my son had been when he first learned how to strip copper. "Electricity doesn't forgive mistakes," I'd tell them. "Neither does trust. Always double-check your connections. They'd laugh, thinking I was talking about wires. But I wasn't. Ruth stopped by every Tuesday morning for coffee. We never talked about Tyler directly anymore. Just life, recipes, books, the way the harbor froze slower that year. Some mornings we'd sit in silence, both of us understanding that healing isn't loud. On February 10th, the mail brought a realtor flyer, one of those glossy things addressed to current resident. I almost tossed it until I noticed the picture on the front. A bright modern kitchen with a caption, "Imagine your dream home." It was my kitchen. My backsplash. Even the scar on the countertop where Elaine once dropped a hot pan. The photo was from Lexi's old post, repurposed, now part of someone else's marketing material. Their dream was built from a thief's fantasy. I laughed, not bitterly, just quietly. Because the house they wanted, I still had it. Not just the wood and stone, the truth, the security, the peace. That night I opened the wall safe I'd installed behind Elaine's painting. Inside sat everything that had mattered in this whole ordeal. The napkin, folded and labeled, the lab report still crisp, my letter of intent, notarized, and one more item, a letter to myself, dated December 7th. Written right after that night, I read it again. If you ever start doubting what you saw, read this. You noticed the ripple for a reason. You trusted your instincts because you built your life on precision. Don't let guilt rewrite the facts. I smiled at my own handwriting, shaky but sure. I slipped it back, locked the safe, and placed Elaine's painting over it. Her favorite, a watercolor of the Chesapeake, soft blue-gray like her eyes. A few days later, I called Tyler, not because I expected him to pick up. I just wanted the message to exist in the world. "Hey, son," I said, voice steady. "It's Dad. I hope you're okay. I hope you're trying. I love you." My door opens for truth, only truth. "You'll know when you're ready." I hung up. No tears, no shaking. Just the click of finality, gentle but certain. Afterward, I sat on the front porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the harbor lights blink like Morse code messages across the water. For once, I didn't decode them. I just let them be lights. Simple, harmless, beautiful. Every man has two lives, I realized. The one he builds for others, and the one he rebuilds for himself. The quiet mornings, the notes in my ledger, the laughter with Ruth over burnt toast. This was my second one. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was living. I picked up my pen and wrote the closing line for February in my ledger, peace restored. Locks changed, heart steady. Then I closed the book, because sometimes the ending doesn't come with thunder or applause. Sometimes it's just a man sitting by the harbor knowing the storm has passed and choosing not to sail back into it. March arrived with thawing streets and gulls circling low over the bay. The ice on the Severn cracked like tired laughter, as if even winter was finally ready to move on. I woke that first Monday to a soft envelope in the mail. Stamped U.S. Treasury Education Fund notice. Inside was a letter confirming the first deposit for the Elaine Hale Apprenticeship Fund. One student, it said, would be awarded a scholarship that fall. His name was Luis Ortega, 19 years old, studying electrical work at the same school where I now volunteered. I stared at that name until it blurred. The kid had my steadiness written all over him. Quiet eyes, calloused hands, hunger for craft over cash. I put the letter on the mantel and whispered, "You've got it now, kid. You get to build something clean." The irony struck deep. The house Tyler tried to steal was now building homes for others. My legacy wasn't rotting in a courtroom or sitting behind locks. It was alive, rewired into purpose. Later that week,